In this video, I'm going to discuss 7 cases that have stuck with me. I'll be talking about the murders of Marie Turner, Oliver Johnson, Marc Despain, Gary Murphy, Kyisha Price, Messiah Hobby, and Heaven Bolen. But before we get to those cases, I am a case for Arkansas, and I talk about Arkansas crime, solved cases, unsolved cases, and missing persons cases. I want to thank you for watching my video, and if you could take a second to like, subscribe, and share this video, I would really appreciate it. Now let's start talking about those cases. I'm going to start by talking about the 2017 murder of Heaven Bolen. This woman tried to get out of an unhealthy relationship, planning to go on with the rest of her life, but that's not what happened. So on January 22nd, 2017, Matthew Bolen dropped his kids off at his sister's house, and then he went to his wife's home. Heaven Bolen wasn't home at the time, so Matthew hid in her house and waited for her to come home. Once she came home, he handcuffed her with her hands in front of her body. Matthew was upset at what he saw as Heaven's infidelities because she had been seeing other people, and Matthew had a real issue with that. Friends that were interviewed by police told police that Matthew was obsessed with finding out what Heaven was up to. Even when they suggested to him to go on with his life, he just absolutely refused. So police believed that Matthew planned to torture Heaven, but it didn't get that far because Heaven escaped. And when Heaven escaped, Matthew chased after her and shot her in the back of the head. Police actually found out about the shooting because Matthew had told his sister what he had done and that he was going to go unalive himself. And then the sister called another brother that they have, and that brother went to the home to check on Heaven. And when he did, he found Heaven lying in the middle of the road in front of her home. So when police responded, they found Heaven, who still had her handcuffs on, in front of her, lying face down in the road in front of her home, suffering a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Heaven was transported to the hospital in Harrison and then transferred to Springfield Hospital, where she died the next day. It seems like after the shooting, Matthew just went and told a bunch of people what he had done. He did tell them that he was sorry, but he also said that he couldn't go back to jail, that he didn't want his kids to resent him for what he had done, which is just ridiculous. I mean, yeah, they're going to resent you, but isn't the time to worry about that like before you actually shoot their mother rather than after? That's just my opinion. So the day before the shooting, on January 21st, Matthew had gone to a friend's house and borrowed a pistol. They had planned to go hunt coyotes the next day, but that's the weapon that Matthew used to shoot his wife. After the shooting, when Matthew came and told him what he had done, the friend tried to follow Matthew to see where he was going, but Matthew was able to lose him. Matthew made the rounds. He told his sister, his father, and 2 friends separately what he had done. There was a 4-day manhunt in Boone County trying to find Matthew Bolen, and he was eventually apprehended. I said earlier that police believed that Matthew had intended to torture Heaven, and there are 2 reasons for that. First of all, Matthew did tell a friend that he asked Heaven before he shot her about what she had been doing, and Heaven did confess to him, according to Matthew. The second reason is because Matthew had what they identified as a torture kit in his vehicle. He had a ball-peen hammer, wire pliers, tin snips, a knife, a rope, and duct tape, which may seem like ordinary objects to have, except for when you murder your wife. So Matthew Bolen was charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and felony with a firearm, and the state was seeking the death penalty. Pretty quickly, so in August 2017, Matthew Bolen pled guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping. Matthew Bolen was sentenced to 40 years in prison on the first-degree murder, 20 years on the kidnapping, and 15 on the felony with a firearm. Those sentences are to run consecutively for a total of 75 years in prison. As of right now, it looks like Matthew Bolen will be eligible for parole in 2069. The 2019 murder of Messiah Hobby. On January 10th, 2019, police were called to a home in Fort Smith, Arkansas over a child who was not alive. The child, the victim, was 5-year-old Messiah Hobby. Some of the information is a little bit difficult to understand because I think that news articles originally confused Rayvon Smith as being a male. But Messiah Hobby's mother was in jail for some misdemeanor in Fort Smith, and Messiah was staying with what I would assume is his stepmother, Rayvon Smith, who was in a relationship with Messiah's mother, Lazaria Jones. In the affidavit for arrest, it says that Rayvon was at the hospital screaming and yelling, asking to see her son, where she was told that her son was in a trauma room and that he was not alive due to his extensive injuries. Messiah had a lot of bruises all over his body, his teeth busted through his lip, and he had internal bleeding in his abdominal cavity. Rayvon Smith basically told the doctor that she didn't think it was that serious and she would have brought him if she thought it was serious. She said that she knew that he had like a cut, a pretty deep cut on his cheek. And the lip where his teeth had came through. She said that she treated those things with alcohol and Neosporin because he didn't have insurance, so they didn't go to the doctor or the hospital unless it was absolutely serious for that reason. According to Rayvon, on January 9th, Messiah fell down the stairs in the home that they were living in and injured himself. His teeth busted through. And then she doctored that, but he didn't complain that he was really hurting or anything after he initially stopped crying. She did say that she doctored it and that she didn't want to make him feel like a girl. So she would just bandage up his wounds because apparently only girls get injuries that are serious. According to Rayvon, the next day on January 10th, there was some broken glass in the apartment that she attempted to sweep down the steps. She believed that Messiah tried to go up the steps and possibly stepped on a shard of glass that she missed and fell back down the steps and again had a larger wound to his mouth area where his teeth came through. She basically just said she gave him a shower, bandaged him up, and that then Messiah, Rayvon, and the baby that was in the home all laid down in the same bed to go to sleep. According to Rayvon, when she woke up, Messiah was cold to the touch. The medical examiner for Arkansas ruled the child's death a homicide due to child abuse. They did list Messiah's cause of death as blunt force trauma. Rayvon Smith was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She did eventually enter a guilty plea for the first-degree murder and was sentenced to 336 months in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. At this time, Rayvon Smith's potential release date is listed as 2038 because Rayvon Smith has had several write-ups or major disciplinary actions in the Arkansas Department of Corrections and cannot keep herself out of trouble, it appears. The 2020 murder of baby Marie Turner. On September 15th, 2020, just after 9 o'clock in the morning, police in Benton, Arkansas received a call about a baby that was on the shoulder of the interstate. So when police responded around mile marker 117 on Interstate 30, they did find an infant. The baby was transported to Saline Memorial, where she was pronounced dead. That baby was 5-month-old Marie Denise Turner. The vehicle that baby Marie was thrown from that morning was driven by her mother, Whitney Turner Tyson. When Whitney was interviewed, she said that just after she threw the baby out along the interstate, a semi-truck honked at her, so she thought that they saw what she had done. She wrecked her car a very short time later. Whitney Turner Tyson was actually transported to the same hospital that her child was in and treated for what police thought was an overdose. At one point, Whitney Turner Tyson did try to go to the area in the hospital that her baby Marie was in, but guards turned her away. They didn't realize that she was the mother because of how disheveled she looked. She was later found and arrested near Carpenter Street. When police tried to question her about it, she was not really responsive at all. According to the affidavit
from police. She tried to pull out her weave. At one point, she started shaking. She wasn't using words. For a while, they were able to communicate with her through head nods and shakes for yes and no. They gave her some time, and finally, she asked to go smoke a cigarette and said that she would tell them everything after she got to smoke. So that's exactly what happened. They allowed her to go smoke. She came back in. She took another minute for herself, and then she started telling police about just throwing her child out along the interstate. As far as I can tell, I cannot see a reason that she ever gave for committing this crime. I was able to find material that said that she actually had 2 mental evaluations going through the court process. Initially, Whitney Turner Tyson was arrested and charged with capital murder and endangering the welfare of a minor, but she eventually pled guilty to first-degree murder. An interview that he gave, the prosecutor on the case actually said that had she taken everything to trial, she may have gotten a lighter sentence because her mental health issues would have came into play, her abuse history would have came into play, but he felt like that would have been an unjust sentence due to her history. Regardless, the plea deal that she took was for 40 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. She does have to serve 70% of her sentence before she is able to be released. Whitney Turner Tyson is being housed at the McPherson unit, and she is scheduled to go up for parole for the first time in 2048.
The 2011 murder of Marc Despain.
It was in Jonesboro, Arkansas on August 24th, 2011, that a horrified Michelle Despain came home from a day out to find her husband dead on the kitchen floor. Of course, she immediately called 911, and police arrived on the scene to find that Marc Despain had been shot twice. Police found broken glass, they found drawers pulled out and stuff thrown everywhere, and it looked like a scene where there had been a burglary that maybe Marc walked into, and he was killed for that reason. Police did realize early on that valuables that would have been taken in a robbery were still in the home, so they began to think that the murder scene had been staged to look like a robbery. They talked to neighbors and asked neighbors if they saw anything suspicious, and neighbors said that they saw a black male driving a blue Mercedes around the neighborhood that day. The Spain family was well off financially, and they lived in a really nice neighborhood in Jonesboro. Marc learned the skill of real estate from his parents. He was originally in business with his father, but he decided he wanted to start his own business. And so he and his father split ways. There was some disagreements about some things. And so Marc's father, Jack Despain, had not spoke to him for a while before Marc's death. So when police began to interview people around the family, automatically some people started pointing the finger at Jack Despain, saying that he cared more about money than he did about his son or his relationship with the son. According to police, Jack Despain was genuinely devastated over the murder of his son, and they didn't feel like that was an act. Part of the issue in Marc and Jack Despain's relationship were essay allegations involving Marc's stepdaughter. Apparently, there was an inappropriate photo of Marc's stepdaughter found on Jack's phone. Jack was never charged with a crime, and it did eventually come out that the stepdaughter actually just borrowed Jack's phone to take the photo of herself for whatever reason. Marc's parents believed that Marc's wife, Michelle, was at the center of that, trying to cause disharmony in the family, but that's something that he was never charged for, and since the stepdaughter had actually just taken a selfie. Police believed that it was possible that Michelle Despain had something to do with her husband's death, but they really didn't have a lot of information to go off at the time until a few days after Marc's visitation, whenever people started coming forward saying that a man named Terrence Barker, who also went by the nickname Qualo, was saying around town that he had been the one that shot Marc Despain. When police pulled Terrence Barker in for questioning, at first he denied it, but then he said a man named Johnny Hubbard had been the one to drive him to the home, and that he did indeed go in and shoot Marc Despain. Terrence Barker said he met Johnny Hubbard in the parking lot, and there was a man that had hired them to get the job done. When he asked who that man was, he identified the man as Carl Kelly, who is Michelle Despain's father. He started to hear from people that Michelle was really calm at the scene before the police showed up. There were family members of Marc's that were saying that Michelle was really clean for saying that she found her husband dead with blood all over him. So obviously she hadn't touched him or anything like that. And police started to realize that she really didn't show a lot of emotion. So they brought her in and asked her if she had anything to do with the death of her husband. And she said no, but she did admit that she had been having an affair with a younger man and using family finances to pay for that man. Apparently, Michelle had been buying this man's groceries, paying for him to have an apartment to live in. She also paid for him to move to that apartment. Police hadn't proved that Michelle had anything to do with Marc Despain's death, so she was able to collect 2 life insurance policies after his death. Police were still investigating. They were able to recover deleted messages between Michelle and her father on the day of the murder, where Michelle sent him a message that said, "has to be today." They said that Carl instructed Michelle to get Marc out of the house. So Michelle took Marc and they went out to lunch that day so that Terrence Barker could go into the home and wait for Marc to come home. And also, Michelle's father was texting her a play-by-play during the course of the murder. So all 4 of these people were arrested. Carl Kelly was arrested, Terrence Barker, Johnny Hubbard, and Michelle Despain. All 4 of the suspects were arrested and charged with capital murder. Michelle Despain actually got a sweetheart deal. She pled guilty to hindering apprehension and was sentenced to 30 years, which allowed her to be eligible for parole after 5. Michelle has since been paroled. She has remarried and is living in Benton, Arkansas, from what I can find. Terrence Barker pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until 2036. I do believe that this is because of a new law, which makes his crime a violent one, and means he has to serve more of his sentence before being eligible for parole, unlike Michelle. Johnny Hubbard was actually already on probation for a drug charge, so he got 40 years on that probation revocation and 18 years for hindering apprehension or prosecution. So he will be eligible for parole in 2025. Carl Kelly was sentenced to 35 years in prison for first-degree murder, but he died of congestive heart failure while serving his time in prison. I don't know. To me, it's really unfair that Michelle Despain is the person that benefited the most from her husband's murder, but she's out getting to live her life. And how in the world did she find another person to marry her after she planned and helped plot the murder of her last husband? That's just my opinion, though.
The 2022 murder of Kyisha Price. On the night of May 27th, 2022, Little Rock police were called to an apartment on Bryant Street by Christy Taylor. Christy Taylor called 911 saying her 13-year-old daughter, Kyisha Price, had stopped breathing. She also stated that her daughter had been having trouble eating earlier in the day. When emergency vehicles arrived, they found Kyisha Price with bed sores. She had open wounds. KATV reported that there was a presence of maggots in some of those wounds. The investigation continued, and on September 8th, Kyisha's death was ruled a homicide by medical examiners, and an arrest warrant was issued for Christy Taylor on a charge of second-degree murder. Christy Taylor surrendered to police later that same day and was booked into the Pulaski County Detention Center on a charge of second-degree murder. The 2014 murder of Gary Murphy. In August of 2014, Little Rock police received a call from Cheryl Gregory. She was concerned about her ex-husband, Gary Don Murphy, and his well-being because she hadn't been able to get in contact with him. And she asked police to go out to his duplex. Cheryl's 26-year-old daughter, Jacqueline Murphy, had been staying there with her father, Gary, in the duplex. And the day before Cheryl called the police, Jacqueline actually told Cheryl that she was having voices that were telling her to kill her father. When police went to the home, no one would answer the door, but one officer could see through the window by the door that Jacqueline was in the living room trying to hide. So they actually were able to get her to come open the door. When she opened the door, police were able to see blood smeared inside the home. So blood was smeared on the kitchen floor. And according to police, Jacqueline Murphy was kind of talking to herself, but they couldn't make out what she was saying. So they went ahead and placed her into custody. Police found Gary Murphy in his home in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket. He had been stabbed 16 times. He had been stabbed in the back, chest, neck, hip, and even actually stabbed so many times that his right foot was almost completely severed. Some of the wounds were made after Gary had already died. So Jacqueline Murphy was arrested. She was originally charged with first-degree murder. She tried to plead insanity. She did have a mental health evaluation, and while the mental health evaluation showed that she had a history of drug use, erratic behavior, homelessness, anger problems, a history of sexual abuse, and she had received psychiatric treatment on multiple occasions, including for bipolar and psychosis. They did rule that she was aware of what she was doing at the time of the crime. So Jacqueline Murphy actually took a plea deal for second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 30 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. Jacqueline is currently being held at the McPherson unit. So she was sentenced in 2016. She is actually already to the point where she is eligible for parole, but she recently in March of 2023 received a 2-year denial. So she will have to wait another 2 years before having a chance to be paroled. The 2018 murder of off-duty officer Oliver Johnson. April 28, 2018, off-duty police officer Oliver Johnson was found shot and killed in his West Memphis apartment. At the time, Oliver Johnson was living at the Meadows apartment building in West Memphis. He was employed by the Forest City Police Department. Witnesses to the shooting say that a vehicle pulled into the parking lot, blaring loud music, fired the shots, and left. They say the vehicle had 3 occupants. In May of 2018, DeMarcus Parker was arrested for the shooting death of Oliver Johnson. He was originally charged with a slew of charges, including capital murder, but eventually that capital murder was changed to a first-degree murder charge. At his jury trial in 2020, DeMarcus Parker was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 835 years in the Arkansas Department of Corrections, which anyone would agree would be the rest of his life. But the Arkansas Supreme Court recently overturned DeMarcus Parker's convictions after his attorneys filed an appeal based on the fact that his right to a speedy trial was violated. The Arkansas Supreme Court said that basically a year out of the total time from the arrest in 2018 to the actual trial date or conviction date in 2020, there was about a year that wasn't actually told for speedy trial. So the rules of criminal procedure say that a defendant has to be brought to trial in 365 days. DeMarcus Parker wasn't brought to trial for 846 days, but a defendant has the right to waive his right to a speedy trial at each hearing for the betterment of their own case, or the defense and the prosecution can agree to waive his right. But apparently at some point he didn't waive his right. I do feel the need to say that the prosecution, the state, believes that the shooting was gang related and that Oliver Johnson was killed by a stray bullet. But it did happen. He was sentenced, and now this sentence is being overturned. So unless something else happens in this case and the Arkansas Supreme Court decision is overturned, DeMarcus Parker could be released very soon.
Thank you for watching A Case for Arkansas. Please remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share.